I'm going to start it off with a trivia question. Who is the only 20-something CEO in the neuromarketing industry? Anyone know? Yes?
Jake Stauch.
That's true, and we have Jake Stauch here today with us. So Jake is the only 20-something CEO in the neuromarketing industry. He works as a researcher he has worked as a researcher at the Duke University Center for Cognitive Neuroscience, where he conducted independent collaborative research in the fields of neuromarketing, neuroeconomics, and the cognitive neuroscience of attention across different sensory modalities. I'm feeling woefully stupid compared to him already. Jake then founded NeuroSpire, an innovative neuromarketing company. As CEO, Jake has set out to run a company that makes brain imaging based upon market research more transparent and more accessible to the mass market. Please join me in welcoming Jake.
Thank you. Everybody hear me? Awesome. Where's it? There we go. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about neuromarketing. It's a great, new, fascinating field, and hope you guys learn a lot. So what is neuromarketing? By a show of hands, how many people have heard the term neuromarketing before? So a good bit of you. Now, how many of you would feel confident coming up here and explaining what neuromarketing is? Any of you? So that's a problem, right? A lot of people heard about it. It's a buzzword. Everybody talks about it. Nobody knows what it is. So I want to kind of get that across exactly. This thing is right in the way. So in a quick definition, neuromarketing is brain imaging market research. It's taking brain imaging technology, taking direct measures of people's brain activity, and using that to inform marketing research, improving advertising, packaging, branding, logos, etc. So all this week we've been talking about the future of marketing and a lot of different ways you can reach consumers in new ways. Neuromarketing is a way to understand better ways to understand what your consumers actually want, what they're thinking, what they're doing. And so the future of marketing, I think, is really going to be defined by the future of marketing research. How do you better understand what the internal preferences are of consumers that they can't consciously express to market researchers? And this is really shown to be a huge trend. This is not a fringe kind of new fad. It's not going away. It's been adopted by all of the major companies in the Fortune 100, some of them here. PepsiCo uses neuromarketing regularly. Google is a regular use of neuromarketing. Coca-Cola, Walmart, Disney, Procter & Gamble, and literally hundreds more companies use this month to month. So why? Why has neuromarketing had this big resurgence of support in this community? And the main reason is that market research up to now, our understanding of consumer behavior, done typically in the past through surveys and focus groups, and in more recent, some other methods, dial testing technology, it's really failed us. We still don't really understand the consumer very well. We don't understand their preferences. We don't predict very well how they're going to behave, how they're going to react to new campaigns. And there's several examples. You don't have to look very far. I picked a few favorites. New Coke. Anybody here remember New Coke? So Coca-Cola back in the 80s was losing the cola wars to Pepsi. Pepsi was gaining huge market share, and they needed to fight back. So they got all these focus groups together. They had all these formulas. They tested it, and New Coke came out on top. People said they liked the taste and blah, 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 and they thought that it would be a great release. They released it, and it didn't go so well for Coke. Instant failure. People came down. Protests over this Coke drink that was too sweet. It wasn't as good, and they underestimated the nostalgia, the power of their old brand was completely lost on them. And so market research really failed in anticipating that. Another example, don't want to pick on Coke, so we'll go to Crystal Pepsi. Does anybody remember Crystal Pepsi? Yes. So in the early 90s, you had these focus groups, again, that Pepsi got together, and they said, so what are the things that you want to associate with a powerful new brand? And people kept saying, well, purity, clearness, purity. These are the things, these buzzwords that people are all crazy about. And so Pepsi took that and they said, well, people are going to love a clear cola. And they didn't at all, really. So that didn't last very long. I think you can still find it on eBay maybe, but Crystal Pepsi went away. And then the final one, you might not recognize this. This is a screenshot from a recent Super Bowl ad, also done by Pepsi. This has been panned as maybe one of the worst ads ever made. Again, Pepsi spent about $3 million even buying the spot, millions of dollars in research and production. That's Eric Clapton. That's some X Factor winner. basically, she sings for the king, who's Eric Clapton. She sings really well. Everybody gets Pepsi, and then Eric Clapton falls into a pit with Flavor Flav, and that's the ad. How bad is this ad? I mean, really bad. On Hulu, it's like one of the worst ones on there. It's so bad that Pepsi, which spent all this money putting it out there, took it off of YouTube. So you can't even find, I would love to show you the video, but you can't find it online because Pepsi doesn't want anybody to see this ad again. So it's really terrible. And millions of dollars spent on all the things leading up to this ad, and we still couldn't predict that failure. And so that's what neuromarketing is about preventing these failures, about understanding consumers before you launch a campaign, before you release a product, a packaging design, your branding strategy, all these things you can test, you can measure before you have accidents like these. So before I go further into kind of the in-depth story of neuromarketing, I got to give you guys a little bit of a science background. So how do we measure the brain? How do we take measures of brain activity? There's two main measures. The first is fMRI. fMRI, developed 80s, 90s, and in common use right now. Basically, you get these awesome 3D maps of the brain. You have these giant spinning magnets running around your head. It takes measures really of changes in blood flow in your brain, and you get pretty cool things. Updated a bit since then. This is actually the first test fMRI machine. Look at the face on this guy, like scared out of his mind. And so if you've ever seen an fMRI machine like without all the things like covered up, it's really spinning thousands of times per second. So it's a kind of a scary thing to get inside. And so this is really cool, but it's not a great measure for neuromarketing. One, these machines cost about $5 million to even have, then a few $100,000 a year in upkeep. If you want to rent one, it's going to be $1,000 an hour. Not ideal if you're going to do a market research study. Also, the data you get isn't that great. You're measuring blood flow. It happens over a few seconds. If you're looking at a commercial, it's not really that useful if you don't know when people had a certain response. So this is not the best way to do neuromarketing. This is what's been more common is EEG technology. With EEG, you're actually having electrodes on people's brains. It's recording changes in voltage, which occur when a bunch of neurons fire together, and you get these currents, and you record that, and you get actual measures of electrical activity on a millisecond level of when this electrical activity is happening. And again, this technology has evolved, gotten a lot more sexy looking there, and now you have this emotive system, which is a wireless thing, really cool, and that's what we use. So what does EEG look like? It's not that exciting. Squiggly lines on a piece of paper is kind of the output. All these lines basically represent each electrode. You're getting the the voltage changes across the skull. But there's a lot of cool stuff we can do with this. So within those lines are, in particular, measures frequency waves. So all those squiggly lines, if you go back, are actually a composite of all these interesting types of waves. Theta waves, alpha waves, beta waves, gamma waves. And I don't need to go into it, but basically we can decompose the squiggles, and we can get these measures, and that gives us an understanding of the brain activity that's happening, again, on a millisecond level basis. So it's a really powerful tool. So on to neuromarketing, we're going to talk mainly two things, the fact issues of what can it do, what are the capabilities of neuromarketing as justified by factual evidence, and what can it do, what are some of the fiction that's been propagated, what's out there, and what's not so good. So fact. What do I mean by fact? Well, for me to consider it fact, I want to see it published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. So company case studies are great, but it's not fact. Companies can produce a lot of things, and you can't really trust everything that's put out there. So if it's published over and over again by different scientists from different labs, and it's subjected to the process of scientific peer review in a scientific journal, I think we can comfortably be okay with the measures that are coming out, and we can trust that. So that's my standard of proof. And so I want to get to some of the measures. With neuromarketing, you can actually measure people's emotions. With this EEG technology, you can measure the emotional response of your consumers. And the way you do that is by measuring something called, it's a complicated name, left-right asymmetry in the prefrontal cortex. And all that means is we're looking at activity of the brain in the left side and the front versus the right side. We're saying when the left side's greater, somebody's having an approach response. They're being drawn into what they're seeing. And that can be they want it, they like it, they're willing to pay for it, and it's this approach that's motivating them towards what they're seeing. And this can be a commercial, anything really. Versus a withdrawal. You're disgusted by it, you're angry with it, you're pushed away from the visual stimulus, from the audio stimulus, whatever you're seeing. And so you can measure that binary, and that's really informative to market research, especially when you know that this is on a millisecond level basis. So this is like in second 7 of that ad, this person is having this response. In a market research setting, you can't have a survey and say, rate on a scale from 1 to 10 how you felt about second 5 of that ad that you just saw. It just doesn't work like that. So this is a really powerful measure. And again, I told you I'd show you proof. These are some snapshots of all the studies that have been done that validate this measure over and over and over again. I'll highlight one really quick. Rafal's study is very interesting. So basically, you had two groups of people. One group saw an ad. They saw basically the same ads. There's 1/2 second difference between the ads where the camera zoomed in on the model's hand versus her face. And basically, he subjected those two groups. He had a third group test to make sure that people, outside observers, couldn't tell a difference between the ads. So people really can't tell a difference between the ads. But what he did afterwards is he did a shelf test to see how the products that the ads portrayed performed in these shelf tests. And he found that 1/2 second difference completely doubled the shelf test response of people. They chose that product that the ad advertised twice as often as the people that saw the other things based on a 1/2 second difference. And the only way that they were able to determine what happened during that 1/2 second was through EEG technology. The EEG predicted that 1/2 second response and completely changed that behavior. So that's also something that would never pop up. You know, that 1/2 second could have ended up on the cutting room floor very easily, but EEG is able to save that. EEG is able to potentially double or, you know, even more modest gains are incredibly impressive when you're dealing with, you know, high volume consumer goods. Another big measure is attention. So we want to know, is what you're producing, is what you're showing to customers, is it grabbing their attention or is it boring them? Are they engaged? Are they withdrawn? You know, what's happening? And so you can do that with a cool measure, that involves looking at the back of the head. Does anybody know what happens in the back of the head, the back of the brain? Anybody? Visual processing. So what's cool is I showed you those waveforms earlier. So one of those waveforms is a slow wave called the alpha wave. And basically when nothing's going on, when you're sleeping, when your eyes are closed, you get this alpha wave. It's really dull alpha wave. It's like neutral state. We look at that alpha wave in the back of the head where you're doing vision, and basically when that alpha wave goes up, you're gone. You're not paying attention, you're not looking at what you're seeing, or you're just not paying, you know, you're not engaged. When that alpha wave disappears to zero, you're really focusing on what's being put in front of you. You're really like into what you're seeing. And so we can use those measures again to evaluate the effectiveness of logos and campaigns that you put out. You know, if you're putting a billboard out, you want to make sure that people are going to see that and they're going to be drawn to that. And that's another power of neuromarketing, to do this where no other method can really come in and have the same results. Again, I'll show you the science. Over and over again, this has been demonstrated. And even in regards to television commercials, this guy did this. He showed people a bunch of television commercials, measured this activity, and then he found out that he could predict the dialogue, the actual dialogue that would be remembered by subjects 2 weeks later by when there was a spike in their attention. So he could predict, you know, they would remember this line, this motto, this saying, based on, you know, when people had this really active engagement. So that's the fact. Now we have to move to the fiction, kind of the dark side of neuromarketing. And it resembles a lot of this stuff, this mind reading, this future telling, crystal ball seeing. I have a few different, two examples that I pulled. You can find a lot wrong with the neuromarketing field, but these are you know, two really notable examples, and they're kind of relevant. So I'll pick on these for a bit. This is a study done, published in the New York Times. This was the 2008 primary season. When we showed subjects the words Democrat, Republican, Independent, they exhibited high levels of activity in the part of the brain called the amygdala, indicating anxiety. Two areas in the brain associated with anxiety and disgust, the amygdala and the insula, were especially active when men viewed Republican. But all three labels also elicited some activity in the brain area associated with reward, the ventral striatum, as well as other regions related to desire and feeling connected. So what do you have here? You have anxiety, disgust, reward, connected, and desire. And all these things that are being pulled out, I don't know what that means. I don't know what a marketer would do with that stuff, but it sounds really cool. You're using these scientific terms. You're dropping names of brain regions, and people love this stuff. Obviously, it was in the New York Times. Got a ton of hits. People go crazy for this. And the funny conclusion of this paper, this was during the 2008 primary seasons, they said, based on our results, it's very clear that John McCain and Barack Obama have no chance of winning their party's nomination for president. Not working out. So what this guy did is Dr. Russell Poldrack. He decided he was going to write a response because he was not happy that the New York Times actually published this. He says, article claimed that it is possible to directly read the minds of potential voters by looking at their brain activity while they viewed presidential candidates. For example, activity in the amygdala in response to viewing one candidate was argued to reflect anxiety about the candidate, whereas activity in other areas was argued to indicate feeling connected. While such reasoning appears compelling on its face, it is scientifically unfounded. And we know that intuitively. You can't just say that this brain legion writes up on the computer and somebody's feeling connected or feeling desire. That's not something that's really, makes sense. And so Russ didn't want to be alone on this, so he sent it out to get some support from the neuroscience community to make sure that people are on the same page. And that's what he did. And so here you have a response from the neuroscience. You have Harvard, Stanford, a lot of Boston colleges on there. And basically, they all say that this is not good stuff. One more example. This is also in the New York Times. You love your iPhone literally. This came out very recently. Most striking of all was the flurry of activation in the insular cortex. Anybody remember what the insula did last time? Why don't we go back? The insula, especially active for disgust, right? So let's go back. Insular cortex of the brain, which is associated with feelings of love and compassion. Love and compassion. That's interesting. The subject's brain responded to the sound of their phones as they would respond to the presence or proximity of a girlfriend, boyfriend, or family member. In short, the subjects didn't demonstrate the classic brain-based signs of addiction. Instead, they loved their iPhones. They loved their iPhones. And we got this by looking at people like in a scanner. Martin Lindstrom, this guy is not a fringe whack job scientist. This guy is one of the most, highest touted figures in neuromarketing. He's an advisor to dozens of Fortune 500 companies. And most people I've talked to have already talked to this guy. He's the author of Biology, the best-selling book in neuromarketing. So there's mainstream stuff out there that we all know is not accurate. And good old Russ Poldrack came back and had another letter for this guy. Op-ed, You Love Your iPhone Literally by Martin Lindstrom purports to show, using brain imaging, that our attachment to digital devices reflects not addiction, but instead same kind of emotion that we feel for human loved ones. However, the evidence the author presents does not show this. The region that he points to as being associated with feelings of love and compassion, the insular cortex, is a brain region that is active in as many as 1/3 of all brain imaging studies. So it's always active, right? Well, it doesn't mean anything. Further, in studies of decision-making, the insula is more often associated with negative than positive emotions. So usually it is disgust. And somehow he leapt and said, why not call it love? And that makes for a better New York Times piece. Again, Russ Poldrack sent this around. He got a lot of support. So we can pretty clearly say that this stuff is wrong. And so what have we learned? I hope you've learned a lot. One, the facts around the industry. There's value in brain imaging market research. A lot of people kind of write off the whole field, throw the baby out with the bathwater and say that this is all sci-fi, it's hocus pocus, and this isn't real. But I've shown that you can do this in a responsible way. You can do this and you can get really powerful measures. You can measure this emotional response. You can measure this attentional response. You can get measures that aren't available from any other form of traditional market research. And that's powerful for brands. That's why Lay's packaging is based on neuromarketing studies. That's why Intel and PayPal use neuromarketing to design their branding strategy. It's why Wendy's new campaign, their new logo, that's just about to come out, is done in neuromarketing. Apple's iCloud is done in neuromarketing. Example after example are using neuromarketing because this is really the best way to understand consumers, understand their raw response. And for marketers, it's really powerful because you don't need to do this guesswork of saying, I think that looks good, or I think that's the best thing we should go with. But you can actually measure this in a relatively inexpensive way and find out what's really going to resonate with the consumers. What do people really want? You don't have to guess. And that's powerful. And what's best is that the science supports this. This is not some marketer coming out with his 10-step method to neuromarketing success and some acronym that he wants to sell you. This is scientific evidence that supports this. But then you have the fiction. And so what's really unfortunate is whenever you have a new field, kind of the winners are the people that are willing to stretch the truth the most. So when you have a new thing like neuromarketing, the people that win are the people that can speak the language of marketers and tell marketers what they want to hear and tell them, show them pictures of the brain, drop name regions like the insula, and say what people want to hear. And it makes it so that those are usually the first to have success. And so that's really why I want to educate you that this mind reading, these complex psychological analysis of people feeling connected and feeling love and all these things that we know intuitively are just not accurate, that they can't be trusted. And I hope that was kind of clear today. And finally, if it's published in the New York Times and kind of has to do with this kind of thing, I might take a second look, maybe Google Russ Poldrack and see what he has to say. But yeah, that's all. Thank you. and hope you learned a lot.